Hello and welcome. My name is Warren Coos, and I am the High Brass Product Specialist for Buffet Crampon USA. You are joining us here, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world, of course, and tuning in. We are here today to talk about the Hollywood Sound. This is going to be all part of our new webcast series. It's a Q&A series that we've come through the program we've set up through what's called our hashtag Together at Home program. This is a great opportunity that we've set forth, and it's really to connect online with all of you, and hopefully you can connect with us in some way, shape, or fashion. The biggest thing that we wanted to do, we wanted to hopefully give you some information. Hopefully this is educational, and hopefully it is helpful for you as well. And I really want to get to a lot of this stuff really quickly, but really, most of all, we really just want to connect with you and make sure that everything's kind of going well. In these very uncertain times, we just really want to give you some welcome distractions and create some content for you. You'll see I'm not alone, and I'm joined here with one of our great Hans Hoyer artists, Richard Todd. We will really, say hello, Richard.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody.
Yeah.
Greetings from Miami.
Miami is right. That's fantastic. Before we get into all the thick of what we're doing, I really just wanted to invite you and welcome you here and allow some people to kind of gather into the chat room here. So as we're getting started, as part of this series, we're doing a series on Tuesday. You can join us. Our next series will be on Tuesday as part of the webcast itself. And that will be hosted by our Woodwind product specialist, Matthew Vance, and also our double reed sales manager, Lori Orr. She also heads the New York showroom for us up in New York City. And also they'll be joined by a special guest, Brenda Schumann-Post, and they'll be talking about double reeds, if you hadn't guessed it already. They'll be talking about double reeds and any offerings and some of the intent details of our double reed brands from Buffet Crampon, from Schreiber, from also our Rigota, our newest brand and part of the Buffet family. So check that out at 2 o'clock on the Buffet Crampon Facebook page on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. So without further ado, I just wanted to go and talk to Richard about a few things. But before I do that, just introducing Richard, man, there's a lot to talk about here, right? So Richard entered the scene pretty early in his career, and I believe you won your first job at age 21. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I was the first contracted assistant principal utility horn for the Utah Symphony back in 1977 with Marisa Bravanel as a music director.
Awesome. Also, it seems, and I'm making sure that I have my information correct, you've been part of, since in that time span of your career, you've been part of over 2,000 film scores.
That's correct. Yeah, after I left Utah, I became principal horn of the New Orleans Symphony when I was 22, when Leonard Slackham was the music director. And then at age 24, I left the Utah Symphony to kind of expand my horizons as an artist, as a musician. I wanted more diversity in the types of things that I would have time to really kind of master, both as a passion and as a pleasure. So I moved back to Los Angeles with no job in sight, particularly. And I also happened to move back in the middle of a musician strike with the Producers Association back in the fall of 1980. So there was no work to be had at all. Yeah. And I ended up getting a job right away as second horn with the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, which lasted for a couple of years. And then I moved over and became principal horn. And as soon as the strike was over, which was in, I believe, January of 1981, there was so much work that had been backed up that there weren't enough players to be able to fill all of the recording sessions necessary. So one of the major contractors in town was overheard saying, "Hey, I need a first horn for a TV session that's coming up next week, and all of my principal horns are busy, and I'm in a jam here." And a couple of people who knew me overheard her speaking and say, "Hey, look, why don't you try this kid? He's got a resume, and I think he might like what he does." And so my very first job in the studios was as principal horn, which is extremely unusual. And I did the best job I could do. And when the session was over, the contractor came up to me and said, "We're going to be seeing a lot of you around here, kid." And that's how it got started.
Awesome. That is a great example of being in the right place at the right time. But also, we talk about as musicians having this area, right? This success or this point in your life or point in your career where preparation meets opportunity. And that's a great definition of that right there. Awesome. No, so before I get started, there's a lot to be said that I didn't even get into, but you mentioned a few things here already, but you were for 35 years the principal horn with the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra,
yes,
which was fantastic. And now you reside in Miami and still are teaching or doing, you are obviously the associate professor of music or of horn with the Miami University's Frost School of Music, which is a great experience. And I'm welcoming a lot of thought and feedback on that. Before we move on, because we talk about the studio music scene and everything like that, which is really where you've kind of blossomed, at least in the beginning of your career, and since obviously you've been doing film scores even up until a couple of years ago. And maybe I'm wrong. I'd like to listen to you talk more than myself. But can you just tell me some of your favorite high points of being in the studios, like who you've met, and maybe sharing some thoughts on that?
Well, oh gosh, I mean, I'm going to start off by saying that Los Angeles has the greatest talent pool of musicians in the world, bar none. What I learned over the years of just listening to this greatness around me is just the flexibility of what people could do. And I was very fortunate to have begun to play in the studios. I feel like I was part of this bridge generation that had access to many of the older players and older composers. Like, for example, my teacher was the great Vince DeRosa. Many people consider him to be the greatest player of all time, and I am in that group of people who believe that. That comes honestly. It does not come as my territorial homerism. He really is. I mean, Dennis Brain thought he was the greatest of all time, and if Dennis thought so, that's good enough for me. I was able to work with the old guard horn players. When I began working, Sinclair Lott, Vince DeRosa, Jim Decker, Richard Parisi, all of these guys that were, legends. I even did a session with Wendell Haas, and when he was 80 or something. I mean, it was amazing. Maybe 90 even. I was able to work with composers like Alex North and Miklos Rosa and Leonard Roseman, and people who had long-standing careers that went back to the 1940s. And just the great thrill of being able to do that. I got to meet Richard and Robert Sherman, the great songwriters for all of the famous Disney films, so like Mary Poppins and I mean, when you get to meet the people that wrote Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, that's a pretty amazing statement right there.
Oh, yeah.
I got to, the highlights, the first film I got to do with Jerry Goldsmith, the first film I got to play with John Williams, which I'll never forget because it was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And working with the great Alan Silvestri on his star-making pictures, Back to the Future. Being able to play with George Delarue, Michael Kamen, all of these amazing, amazing musicians. And of course, I think the longest standing relationship I pretty much had with anybody was my relationship with a young composer, not so young anymore, but I did everything that he did for the better part of 25 years, a gentleman by the name of Michael Giacchino, who we all know at this point. He's pretty much a household name. And then that's to say nothing of the pop artists I got to work with. If anybody had told me when I was in high school or college that I would have a resume that would include the names of Paul McCartney, Elton John, Michael Jackson, Barbra Streisand, Frank Sinatra, Aerosmith, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Kanye West, P. Diddy, Sean Combs, you name it. I mean, there's too many to mention at this particular point. Ray Charles, Willie Nelson, Kenny Loggins. I mean, Kenny, oh God, he just passed away, Kenny Rogers. Just too many to mention. And the fact that I got to not only work with these people, but I got to meet them, Madonna. It blows me away that I had all of these incredible opportunities to work with these people and get a chance to make music with them. That was, I never really considered myself a studio musician. I consider myself a musician. And so I went where the opportunities took me, which also included playing chamber music with some of the great chamber music organizations in the United States. I had a fantastic relationship with my great mentor, Gunther Schuller, who produced 4 or 5 records for me. Some were classical, some were jazz, one was both. I had a chance to be a concerto soloist at the Hollywood Bowl, at Carnegie Hall. I've traveled all over the world performing recitals and concertos, and all because I just have a passion for what I do.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. And in fact, what I was gonna ask, that's ridiculous amounts of work and highlights that anyone would be really. I would be screaming at the screen, just being like, "This is crazy!" Right? All these great experiences and fantastic accolades that you've been fortunate, and we would all be as fortunate to have something like that happen in our lives. So kudos and great. Wow. So through all of this and having all these experiences, what was your journey? Can you describe your journey of creating or having that sound, like as we're talking about today, the Hollywood sound being this iconic thing everyone really has to wrap their head around and try and recreate in orchestras and in the studios. Can you describe your journey of trying to recreate or envelop that same sound that everyone is talking about?
Absolutely. I had basically I had 2 major teachers in my life and 2 major influences in my life. My 2 teachers, first one was a gentleman named Waldemar Linder, who was principal horn of the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra back in the 40s and 50s. And I believe he was in the Cleveland Orchestra before that. And then after 7 years with Mr. Linder, I went to Vince DeRosa. And it was my time with Vince DeRosa that changed my life. I mean, I got all of the terrific, there was a lot of things that I learned from Wally Linder that I think were extremely helpful with creating my thought process with how I was going to practice throughout my life. But what Mr. DeRosa did was he basically taught the simplicity of how to play. And his whole idea about playing was based upon developing a strong air column. He always called it a column of air. He said everything is based on air. I remember my first lesson with him. I walked into my first lesson with him. I was a little bit nervous because I knew who I was sitting in the room with, and I knew I wasn't worthy. And he, somewhere in that lesson, he paraphrased pretty much what you need to know about playing you're going to hear in this lesson. And that was kind of it was at the time, it was a little bit kind of confusing because I wasn't sure what he meant and I wasn't sure how I was going to be able to process that. But what came to be was that his primary purpose was to do long tones, was to do slow exercises to work the quality of the air deep into the horn and try to make horn playing as effortless as possible. And of course, when you listen to Vince DeRosa play a horn solo, say in the Mickey dying scene in Rocky III, when you hear that solo, it's just amazing to me that you know, it's just so effortless and yet so complete. He always believed that it was our job to develop a complete set of overtones, higher overtones and lower overtones. Because if you did that, you were getting your air deep into the horn, and that's where the magic happened. There has finally been a compilation of the career, life, and teaching and thought processes about Mr. DeRosa called Carved in Stone. And that book is written by Todd Miller. And I highly recommend anybody who has a love for the Hollywood sound to buy that book, because everything that you need to know about production of sound is broken down in such a way that it's relatable to everybody. It's how I teach all of my students at the Frost School. I've continued to teach that way because I believe that it worked. He never taught embouchure importance. He always believed that if there's nothing wrong with the embouchure and it's not getting in the way of the air, then keep it that way. It was all building the foundation of your house, building blocks of sound, and just working to be as efficient as you possibly could. And that's the basis of the Hollywood sound. And I think that the difficulty of developing that sound, particularly nowadays, is that it requires something that technology doesn't necessarily demand of us anymore. And that's patience. It's patience and repetition and just knowing that the work that you're doing is not going to produce immediate results. There's a specific exercise that Mr. Rosa would have all of his students do. And you could always tell when a DeRosa student was practicing because you would hear this exercise at one point or another. And I can promise you that all of us would, at one point or another, vent vehemently to each other about why we're not getting anywhere with this exercise. But in reality, what we were really doing was we were planting the seeds in the ground of growth. of development, of character, of sound. And just like you plant any seeds anywhere, if you sit there to try to watch those seeds grow, they're not going to grow. But if the purpose that you plant them in, the seeds know what to do when they're planted in the ground. All you have to do is just nurture them. And you come back a few weeks later and all of a sudden there's growth. If you'd sat there and looked at it and expected it on a daily basis, you're not going to see it. And I think young players these days have a difficult time with that element of patience in their playing. And I think that because this is such a basic element of playing, building the character of your sound, building what I consider to be a complete sound. I know there's a lot of people that, well, you know, they have a dark sound or a heavy sound, or it's not flexible and all that kind of stuff you need. I'm here to be living proof that that's completely wrong. And the more developed your air is, the more complete you can play with a beautiful resonance to your sound. Something that still sounds like you, but it's not top heavy or bottom heavy. That basically, and the ability to be able to hear and blend immediately. That's what creates the Hollywood sound.
Yeah, that's hugely valuable. I like the reference to the book you mentioned, and that's going to be first on my list to delve into and get my hands on for sure. And also, what most people and maybe some viewers aren't aware of, and I hope you are, but Vince DeRosa is a huge icon in the horn world, and so if you don't know his teachings or his ideas and his career, I pursue and really kind of urge you to look him up and find more info on him. Find recordings. His career started, I believe, in 1935. It's like 70 years worth of his career is documented well, because he started in the studios with Henry Mancini, with Frank Sinatra, working with some great players and great musicians in all genres of music. And with that,
if I may interrupt, he also was mentored by Alfred Brain.
Oh, really?
Of the Brain family, yeah. Alfred Brain was the one member of the Brain family that came over from England. He was offered a job as principal horn of the Los Angeles Philharmonic, I think sometime in the 1920s. I'm not exactly sure. Vince was born in 1920 and moved to LA at some point, I believe in the early 30s, maybe a little earlier than that. But the point is that when sound came into pictures, all of the motion picture, all of the studios had their own contract orchestras back then. When sound came into pictures, all the studios scrambled to put together symphony orchestras for for all of their sessions. And so that was when Al Brain left the Los Angeles Philharmonic to go become principal horn at 20th Century Fox Studios. And Vince ended up getting a job at Fox as well, and Al began to mentor him and really helped out a lot. It should also be mentioned that at some point after Al Brain left the Los Angeles Philharmonic, one of the people that replaced him early on was a gentleman by the name of James Staliano. And for those of you who are from Boston or are just students of history of the horn, there's one of the great iconic names in the history of Boston horn playing. He was principal horn of the Boston Symphony for 25 or 30 years. So, there's a lot of cross-pollination of things, and the level of artistry of people that went through the studios at one point or another. I mean, you've got Alfred Brain, but you also have to remember that there was that great exodus. Well, it wasn't great. I mean, it was a necessary exodus of musicians from Europe escaping the terrors of the Nazi regime. And so many great players and composers and people who ended up really defining the character of sound for motion picture film scores really came from a historical era of time that was not one of our more prouder moments as a society.
Yeah, no, that I wasn't even thinking about that, but that is a huge huge factor when we talk about culture and this, why people were immigrating at that particular time and how that developed into the sound that we have today. Yeah.
And when if I can please just mention just a little bit about the history of Hans Hoyer horns.
Please.
Hoyer, as we know it now, was purchased by Gerhard Meinl, my dear friend and wonderful, colleague and so on, in the late 1980s after the Berlin Wall went down. And he saw this fantastic opportunity to create a crispy style horn. It was not something that Hoyer was, that they did not have a very large market for that, particularly in Germany, because Germany is so tied to Alexander, that he really saw the market for a great American horn. We all know that the history of the great American horn, when you consider that particular type of sound, it wasn't just used in Hollywood. Many of the great principals around the country, Myron Bloom, Mason Jones, they were all playing old Con 8Ds. But Con went through a series of ownership changes, and so Gerhard saw this opportunity, and so he recruited two of the greatest exponents of the great 8D sound to help him design what is now the Hoyer 7800 and 6800 series. And those two people were Vincent DeRosa and Myron Bloom. And so we have them to thank. And then they decided that they really kind of needed somebody of the next generation to become the voice of the instrument going forward. And that's where they brought me into play. So I've had a standing relationship with Hoyer now for, gosh, nearly 20 years. And I was and I can say this because I was one of Con's North American spokespeople for their AD. And I wasn't particularly pleased with the direction that they were going. I felt like they never had really gotten back to the quality that was in Elkhart, Indiana, which was their original home. And so I started to play on a Hoyer, and I loved it so much, but I didn't really know what to do about my sponsorship because I felt like I wasn't being truthful in what I was saying. So I sent an email to Gerhard Meinl saying, I don't know if you do artists, what do they call it? Endorsements or whatever, if you allow artists to endorse your instruments, but I would be very interested. And to Gerhard's credit, he said, I've just been waiting for you to ask me, which says a lot because he wasn't going to go out and try to take me away from another company. That told me a great deal about the quality of the human being. And it tells me a great deal about the quality of Buffet Crampon for the fact that they are extremely respectful of the Hans Hoyer line. They are extremely respectful of the history of it and what has caused it to become as terrific as it is today. So Vince and Myron were the original creators with Gerhard of the Hoyer Crosby series style horns.
Yeah, no, that is phenomenal. They are, Myron Bloom and Vince DeRosa were instrumental in the development of it, and I'm glad you talked about Gerhard Meinl because without him, we would not be seeing the success that you've shown. And I think to that credit, you probably wouldn't be as knowledgeable as you are with not only the makeup of the Hans Hoyer horns and everything, but I think they wouldn't have expanded into the United States, and that's all thanks to our good friend Gerhard as well. And he's very much still involved and doing everything that he can to preserve and and grow these brands to the respect that they need and deserve. No, it's great. A lot of so thank you for that background. We do have some comments and questions I do want to talk about while we're in the feed here. Actually, one of my colleagues, our low brass product specialist, was a little bit curious because he's asking about what your work was like, what it was like to work with some of the known composers, especially in today's world, like Michael Giacchino and his director at that point, which is was J.J. Abrams with Star Trek, and especially with you having such an iconic role, being the solo voice that opens the entire series every movie. So,
for the Star Trek series, you mean?
Yeah,
that's right. Well, it started off basically, all situations with recording sessions basically comes by recommendation to begin with, and after that it becomes word of mouth. One of the things about the recording world, it's essentially a freelance world, and so you're only as good as your last session, and pretty much every session that you play is an audition for your next session, because the product has to be done, it has to be finished, it has to be in the can. And so a lot of times you're either going to be on a contractor's list, or you're going to be somebody that a composer themselves requests, or maybe it's one of their orchestrators that says, hey, you really, particularly with newer composers, orchestrators and contractors will have quite a bit of influence to a certain degree. And I think that's what happened with Michael, because I had done a great amount of work with Michael's a longtime orchestrator, Tim Simonek, with another composer named Graham Revell, and a couple other composers as well. Excuse me. I'm doing the COVID appropriate cough.
As we all do, yeah.
Yes. And so this new young composer, Michael Giacchino, had a session. It was for a made-for-TV movie called Semper Fi. And you can tell after, so many years in the business, who's really, everybody's good, but then the people that really stand out. I'll mention just a couple of names, but they are not solely the ones. John Williams, of course, Jerry Goldsmith, of course, James Horner would stand out to me. James Newton Howard stands out to me. Alan Silvestri stands out to me. Randy Newman stands out to me. For every name that I just mentioned, there's probably 20 more that I didn't mention, and all belong in that category. Bruce Broughton is another one. But when you hear somebody that's relatively new, you can tell whether or not they have it. And that it is undefinable. It's just, you can't put it in words, but you just know that they have it. And Michael had it. And you could tell from this little low budget made for TV movie that the melodic content and the way it was interwoven, that the young man really was thinking a lot. And had a lot going for him in terms of how he respected the art form of doing this. And so you could just tell. And I was fortunate enough that he liked what I did. At the end of the session, as he was thanking everybody, I kind of blurted out, which was kind of unusual for me to do, but I blurted out, please come back. Because I just felt like, okay, this guy's got something special. And that turned into a TV series called Alias. And it turned into another TV series called Lost. And then he got, as Lost was happening, he got his first motion picture break, and the rest, as they say, is history.
That's excellent. Yeah, no, I love the idea of walking into and having that real realization that this gig could be my last. So, you know, you're only as good as what you're about to perform. So
I can tell you, I just thought of something when you were talking about memorable moments. I do want to mention one particular memorable moment because it really stands out. I was called to go do a recording session with Natalie Cole one day. We all remember Natalie Cole, God rest her soul. And got to the studio and got out my horn and I sat down and I put the headphones on and they were playing something in the headphones already. And clearly it was going to be something that was going to be the track that we were going to lay down. And what I was listening to in the headphones was her father, Nat King Cole, singing Unforgettable. And I was part of that recording session where they made that duet of Natalie singing with her father, Nat. And you just knew the second we started listening to this, we knew this was going to be a special day.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I remember you telling me that story before, but I'm glad you were able to share it here. That is a beautiful moment. And I think we can all feel the jealousy throughout the world here. So that's awesome. That's really great. I have a few more questions. I don't see many questions through the comment section, but please, if you're listening or viewing in, feel free to make any suggestions or comments in the comment section and ask your questions to the myth of legend here, Richard Todd. I see some comments just saying like, saying hello and stuff like that. So Peter from Poland, thank you so much for joining us today. Also, he's saying that he plays on a Hanswary G10. And so thank you so much for that and for your patronage and your purchase whenever it was. So thank you so much for joining us today. I also wanted to mention a few things, but my interest in a lot of this is going to be really how I'm going back to Star Trek. I'm sorry, because I'm not only a nerd in terms of that. You can see behind me some accolades to that, but the opening solo and throughout the series of the newest 3 Star Trek films, I'm curious how your current equipment, because I know from knowing you that you don't only play on the 6800 series, but you also own and play on the 6800, 7800 series, the G10, the K10, and some other, the triple and some other horns that we'll get to as well.
Well, let's not forget the RT91.
And I'm waiting to talk about that for sure. We will certainly get to that. But what goes into your thought processes when you have the score in front of you, deciding to play a particular instrument in these sessions? And why?
I own all of these instruments, but my everyday driver is the 6801. That's the horn I go to work with. You know, I don't particularly need any other horn other than that. If I've got something that is occasionally I would bring a triple only for the purposes of, like, if there's just an insane amount to play and the tessitura is just insanely high all day long, I might not necessarily take it out of the case, but at least I know it's there as a safety valve in case fatigue really begins to set in. And but my daily driver and the instrument that I would use 98%, 99% of the time is the Hoyer 6801.
Cool. And with your experience being a con player before, I know this is gonna date 20 years ago or so, but being a con player, coming from that concept of design and experience, what are the differences? Why do you choose to play the 6801 on a regular basis versus anything else for that matter?
The manufacturing is better.
Yeah.
The finish, the way the instrument is put together, is just a far more it's just a far more complete professional fitting. They're consistent. I remember one of the things that Vince Rosa told me. By the way, I just want to make sure that people actually know this about Vince. He is still alive. He's 99 years old, and he lives in Pasadena, California. He's 99 years old. Yes. Think about that. Yeah. But I remember his telling me he was so confident about the Hoyer horns. He says, I remember him telling me you could buy one over the phone. And I think that's absolutely true. I mean, Warren, you know that many times where I've gone out and I've done clinics or I've done concerts in places, I basically have you guys send me a horn. I don't even travel with my own instrument. You guys send me a horn and I just pull it out of the box and I'll play my recital or my clinic or whatever it is right there. Yeah. If it's a situation where I'm playing classical music and jazz, then I will bring my own desk cat, the RT91, which I helped design. I will bring that one, but in terms of the 6801, I believe it. You can play them. You can buy one over the phone. You can pull it right out of the box and play it, and I've done it many times.
Yeah, there's a perfect. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that, but I do want to emphasize something. For those of you out there that believe that your sound on your instrument is determined by the instrument that you play, you are, I think, you are mistaken. Okay. There are certain idiosyncrasies that certain types of horns have, but we're not talking about, I'm going to pick up a Conn or a Hoyer and I'm going to get the Hollywood sound right away. That's not how it works. It's developed through practice. It's developed through methodical work over time, over time, over time, over time. I explained it all in a series of practice tutorials called The Art of Practicing, where, and it's all explained in the Vince Rosa book, Carved in Stone. It is a conceptualized element of developing the quality of your sound. You can make that sound on pretty much any instrument. The instrument itself will have certain kinds of ways of playing. The Geyer style, how the air goes into the horn, is a different way than how the air goes into the horn in a Crispy style. But to limit one's thought process to the fact that, well, a Geyer style is going to make me play lighter and so on and so forth. No, it has a different demand. But the instrument does not make the sound. The player makes the sound. But you have to have the patience to develop this. And what is amazing to me is that how revered the Hollywood sound is around the world, yet very few people are teaching that sound or are ascribing to want to have that character of sound themselves. And that part I've never really understood, but I think it's a dying art form to a certain degree, which I think is too bad. There are still some people that really teach sound as their primary thing. Julie Landsman is one of them. Hi, Julie. I certainly do. When you deal with the character of your sound first, everything else will come. Everything else will come. But it's easier to just practice technical stuff and be able to see quicker results than it is to actually practice the mechanics and the fundamentals of your playing, the things that require repetition, 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 repetition without seeing results. It's a little bit like having a blind faith in something, but if you understand the mechanics of it, how to breathe, etc., the end result, you're going to get that kind of sound. And that sound is going to blend with anybody you sit down and play with.
Yeah, no, this is characteristic stuff. And I love the ideas that that you're coming out with. Obviously, it's the demands of today's horn players or well, players in general, you know, musicians, because the music have particular demands, the repertoire have particular demands. It kind of pushes us towards this, like everything must be about technique, when you know, we have to remember really why we started playing in the first place, which is that sound, that and developing that sound and doing the things that are kind of mundane, for lack of a better term, of course.
Long tones are boring, but they have to be done.
Exactly. Yeah. No, long tones are key, and so are all the things that go into creating that beautiful and sound. And it only takes time, you know.
I can promise every single person out there that if you spent an hour a day doing long tones, doing nothing more than just taking a good strong breath and putting your air deep into the instrument and just finding that sweet spot where the resonance really happens, and you just develop that and you do it again and again and again. And if you do nothing but long tones for an hour a day for a week, you'll be a better player with anything else that you do.
I 100% agree with you. That's awesome. Awesome stuff. We have a few questions and maybe some comments. I think one's probably better answered by me, but only because it's a little technical in nature. And then there's a lightning round question I think would better be served for you. Jamie, I'm sorry, I'm going to not pronounce your name correctly, but Jamie Pathouth. So I hope I didn't butcher that, but he says he's a Con 8D player. He hasn't played many Hans Hoyer horns, and he's asking what is unique about the brand and what stands out about the horn. I think some of the things we talked about today, Jamie, is iconic about the brand, and particularly when we talk about the 6800 series. If you're a Con player nowadays, not saying anything negative about the brand itself, because they are great horns and were great horns. They had a transition from when they were made in Elkhart to when they're made in East Lake, and a few things in between, of course. But they lost some of the character of their sound, as you would when you change any kind of production facilities and tooling. And when you're working on doing, even maintaining your tooling can change the intricacies and details of how the horn is manufactured. So when we talk about what we went after 20 plus years ago to develop this Hans Hoyer Heritage Series horns, we went after the musicians that were doing it on a regular basis, which was Vince DeRosa and Myron Bloom, and having that centered sound and having decades of being involved in the studio music scene, just like Richard has been. You know, these guys have been tried and true players for decades.
Don't forget, Myron was principal horn of the Cleveland Orchestra.
Of course.
So it wasn't just studio players.
Of course. So, but there was an iconic sound with that horn that was a little bit lost, and so we tried to fill that gap of that sound, not necessarily recreating something or copying something, but we tried to recreate the sound that everyone was demanding, like the Cleveland Orchestra, like the studio musicians in Hollywood. And that's really what we went after. So what makes us unique is that everything's made in Germany, everything's made in-house in our manufacturing procedures in Germany. And so there's a lot of technical information that I can certainly answer afterwards. But the lightning round question that I wanted to really focus on is actually geared towards you, Richard. And that was, what are your top three, if you just had to answer and pick off the top of your head, out of 2,000 plus films, what are your top three favorite films you worked on?
Oh God. Well, I think certainly the Star Trek film, the first one, certainly. I mean, you could put them all into the same kind of category. I'd have to say Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Bill Lane was first horn on that, and he did a wonderful job. But it just because of the thrill of being able to say, okay, I got to play in a John Williams film. And then I went on to play in about 40 other John Williams films.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing. Yeah.
but that, the first time was something special. And God, the third one, I think the third one might have been could possibly be The Incredibles.
Okay.
Oh no, you know what? I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say it's going to be Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Ooh.
With Michael Kamen as the composer.
That's
and the reason why was that the stuff that we had to do in the time of day that we had to do it, there were some of the great chase scenes, some of the heavy things in that film that were recorded at 1 o'clock in the morning. And it was one of the busiest months in history. And, we were working basically from 8 in the morning till 2 or 3 in the morning, going from studio to studio, working on different films. And everybody was so exhausted that basically we would be asleep during 10-minute breaks and then have to get right back up and do it again.
Oh, man.
So, every picture has a story. It's like the old Rod Stewart song, every picture tells a story.
Yeah.
There could be stories told about basically any session, like ever. And boy, that's a lightning round. That's a tough one, but that's I'm going to stick with that right now.
No, that's a great answer. I like all of those. All of those were perfect reasons of why you chose them too. So there are some other questions I wanted to get to, but before I do, I want you to really talk about a few things. Maybe just slight answers to these next few questions, and then I really want to get into some things that you want to talk about and some of the intricacies there. The one question is actually from another one of my colleagues. First of all, there's a few people that just say hello. So Zoltan, hello from Serbia. That's awesome. Thank you for joining us today. My colleague, Matt Vance, asked a pretty question. He's our woodwind product specialist. For those of you who don't know, but he'll be hosting our next webcast on Tuesday. He asks, do you have a different approach from when you are entering the studios to perform versus doing something live? Do you have a different approach with how you approach the playing aspect?
No, I don't. And the reason for that is what I learned about playing in the studios is you had to up your focus game, which it's very easy to relax somewhat when you're in an orchestra situation. And I can speak from that, from a firsthand knowledge, because not only, I already said I was in the Utah Symphony, New Orleans Symphony, Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. Yes, it was not a full-time gig. But that doesn't mean you don't have the same, same point of reference. And I was also principal horn of the Santa Barbara Symphony for probably 10 years, also a part-time orchestra, but it just kept my classical chops going, and it kept me going through the repertoire, which I love to do. I always have loved to do it. I've studied orchestral repertoire as seriously as I've studied anything else, and I feel like I played everything there is to play. I know that there's going to be a couple pieces that I'm going to go to my grave regretting not ever having played. The two that stand out right now are Mahler 7 and the Schoenberg Gura Leader. But there's very few pieces other than that I have not, sunk my teeth into at one time or another. I did not play them 25, 30 times a piece, but I feel like I got a pretty good handle on what they're supposed to sound like based on the mentoring that I was given on how to look at learning this material. So what the studio world taught me was bring your A game from your first note, always. What I refer to in one of the chapters of my Art of Practicing series is red light concentration. When that red light goes on and it's time to make a take, that concentration has got to be it's got to be thick in the room. You can feel it. You can feel the focus. So I don't take anything different from a recording session into a rehearsal or a performance. I don't change the way I play. I don't I'm not one of those believers that, oh, well, you only play to the microphone, you don't fill up a hall, you play with a lot less presence. I don't believe that, because I'm living proof that that's not how I played. And I did not force sound out of my instrument harder just because I was playing in a 1,500 to 2,000 seat auditorium. I knew that the resonance in my sound that I had spent all that time developing was going to get that stuff back there. But more than anything else, what I learned about developing the character of my sound so that I could have complete sound, which is something that I focus on every day when I pick up the instrument. The first thing that comes to my mind is, where's my sound? So I'm immediately connected to my air. And what I found that I could do with the character of my sound, with having developed a complete set of overtones, is that I can then make colors out of that. I can make different types of colors. If you listen to my jazz playing, you're going to hear me play with a different character of funk and lyricism than I might play if I'm playing classical music. But if I do my job well, and I leave that always up to the listener to decide, I'd like to think that whatever it is, the character of sound that I'm creating is appropriate for the character of the music that I'm doing at that particular time. So once I really kind of understood how the studio world worked, I felt like it changed the way that I approached going to work as a live performer. From my first rehearsal, it was like I'm on from the first note. My focus is such that I'm looking at performing, not rehearsing.
Yeah, no, those are great great points. I love that idea of staying within the same center, right? And then it's all about your interpretation that creates the differences, right? No,
right.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And the composer's intentions, yes.
Exactly. Great. I think this is a good chance for us to segue into something which is going to be really cool for you, and for everyone, I hope. But you mentioned that your experiences, because you are so versatile, and we were just talking about the studio music versus going into an orchestra or playing live on a concert. But there's a third or fourth or fifth genre that I know that you're involved in and you do on a regular basis, which is you, with the very, very unique, and not many horn players are doing this, or I guess I should say, not very many horn players are doing this, and I don't know the reason. Maybe you can speak to this, but you are very involved in the jazz scene as a horn player, which is great, and I hope that maybe you can speak to this and your experience as being a jazz hornist, but also what equipment you use to change between both those, why you do so, and just speak to your jazz experience and how you got into it to begin with. Yeah.
Well, I first got into jazz because my first instrument was piano, and I played that from the time I was 4 till about the time I was 8, and that's when I picked up the horn. I just wanted to play something different. But I continued piano playing, but mostly for fun. And I ended up kind of playing when I was in high school and early college, kind of keyboards in a rock and roll band. And so improvising would come out of that. But then when I got to New Orleans, I realized, wait a minute, this is an opportunity here to kind of begin to at least get acquainted with an absolute character of music that is identified with that city. And so I asked people, is there a good jazz teacher in town? And every single person I asked came back with the same name, and that name was Ellis Marsalis. And we just lost Ellis over about the last 10 days or so due to COVID. And it leaves a big hole in my heart, because although I didn't spend a a whole lot of time with him throughout my lifetime. I spent quite a bit of time with him when I was in New Orleans, and he really opened up my ears and opened up my eyes about, you know, what how the similarities of jazz and classical music really happen, and it has to go with listening.
Yeah.
And when I first decided that I really wanted to learn how to play jazz, the last thing I did was improvise, because I felt like improvisation was only going to be as good as my ability to be able to control the instrument I was playing. And so I think that's an incredibly important element of this that many young people kind of overlook, I think, is that if we can't play the instrument, we can't say what we want to say. And I also listened to other players. I didn't listen to horn players. I never listened to any jazz horn players. I have the greatest of respect in the world for Julius Watkins. He was the master. But it wasn't jazz French horn playing I wanted to do. It was jazz playing. And so I listened to a lot of people that I could relate to. I listened originally to the Count Basie Band and to Oscar Peterson and to Clark Terry and all these types of people. And all I did was I played along with what I heard. And I wanted to match their nuances of articulation, nuances of sound. Jazz music, if you think about it, if you look at the characters of music as a language, if we want to think about music as a language, then let's take a look at the alphabet that we use in the English language and ask ourselves how many different languages around the world use our alphabet as the basis for their language. And when we think about that, how many different nuances are there? How many different ways are letters and are vowels and consonants being spoken in those different languages, even though the letters remain the same? And so that's how I began to look at how do I want to like really learn jazz. And so I started to really, you had to do things completely differently as you would a classical player. You had to kind of you had to break your own rules in order to be able to carry off certain elements of jazz, which makes jazz what it is. And it was only after that time that I started to really try to improvise to a certain degree. And improvisation is really nothing more than just spontaneous composition. And it's based upon the chord progressions that you're doing there, and alternate chords, alternate harmonies, and it's based on a lot of building blocks of things. And as a result of my spending time with that, I actually began to hear classical music in a different way. And I felt like I became a better classical musician as a result, because I was listening to the music differently. And I was hearing more. I mean, when I work with my students about orchestral repertoire, I demand that they know what's going on in the score. Otherwise, they're not going to have any idea how their part fits in. And if I'm just kind of like just sitting there wailing away, playing a jazz solo without any respect given at all to the chord progression that the composer wrote, whether it be Thelonious Monk, Duke Ellington, or me, it's going to sound like gibberish. And there has to be a plan. And that was one of the things that Ellis did wonderfully with me, was that we would play tunes together. And if I started kind of walking down a road that had nothing to do with what we were doing, he'd just stop. And he'd just look at me like, what are you doing? And it just got me thinking, it got me listening. And one thing I am very concerned with young classical players is that they play with their eyes. They don't play enough with their ears. They don't play enough with a sense of relativity of what's going on around them. And that's the crux of being a great artist. I never wanted to be considered a good jazz horn player or a good jazz classical player or a good classical player. I just wanted to be known as a good musician. That's all I've ever really wanted to be known as. And if somebody thinks that my ability to play the instrument is uh, uh, respectable, then so much the better.
Yeah, no, that's phenomenal value right there. Just what I took away, and I hope this speaks to you and what you were talking about. But what I took away from everything you said is really that what you felt is your interest in jazz, which stems from being young and just playing piano, and actually getting involved with Ellis Marsalis, which that's a tragedy in the last very recent days, of course. But your involvement in jazz and the love for the music and the love for that has gotten you to listen a lot more and realize that a lot of people, like you said, should be focusing on finding where their part fits with everything else. And it's something that we talk about on a regular basis. Like, you don't practice in rehearsal, right? Rehearsal is for you to learn everyone else's part, not for you to learn your own part, which is really speaks to that.
Good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great. Really great. I do want to ask you if, as many people, because they don't delve into this particular time, but you do something very unique when you do play jazz, and you play on a different instrument. Is that correct?
I do. I play on an instrument of my own design, the Hoyer RT91 descant horn. Yeah, and the reason why I do is that I like to take the instrument and push it to its limits. I like to play. I will hit notes hard. I will, based on the tune. If it's a driving type of tune, or if it's a real kind of, down home funk thing, it's my job to play the characteristic of the music. And I feel like that particular horn, because it's a little smaller, can take what I'm giving it. It will take the pounding of articulation and colors of sound and be a little bit more immediate. I, of course, do play the 6801 with jazz sometimes. As a matter of fact, on some of my recordings, I do use the full double horn. But stylistically, for the types of things that I'm trying to get out of it, I find that the RT91 is a much better match for the kinds of things that I'm going to eventually speak when I'm playing a tune. Yeah. Now, having said that, it's also the horn that I use when I play the Bach B minor Mass, when I play the Haydn Horn Signal Symphony, when I play the Brandenburg Concerto. It's something that I've used in Mozart symphonies, and it is a remarkable horn. It is a fantastic instrument. I dare say it may be, if I'm so bold as to say so, I think it's the best descant on the market.
Well, I'll let other people make that decision, like yourself and others who try it. But I have also heard that from other people. And so if you haven't tried it, if you don't know what we're talking about the RT91 and RT92, depending on your preference of linkage, right? So you have string or what we call our 3B mechanical linkages available to you, and they're also available in yellow brass and gold brass.
I prefer the gold brass.
Exactly.
I have both. I play them both, but I love the gold brass. It makes me feel at home.
Yeah, and they're wonderful horns. When you have a chance to get them in front of you, just try them. Don't pass them by. So I have a few more questions for you before we wrap things up. If you've been listening throughout this time, thank you so much for tuning in. And also, if you have more questions, please leave them in the comments, and I will get back to you. And hopefully, I can forward some questions that are more suited towards Rick, and maybe he can get back to you as well. Lastly, Richard, I know you want to talk about this, so tell me about what you're doing today. Some of the kind of content that you're creating for others that are outside of your studio. You have something called The Art of Practicing, if I'm not mistaken. And
I do.
Tell me how this project came to be.
Well, I've created this series of video tutorials called The Art of Practicing, and the subtitle of it is How to Be an Analog Thinker in a Digital World. And I'm realizing how much I'm aging myself, because there's actually probably a lot of people that may not understand the meaning of the word analog. I suggest that you look it up. But just to give you a visual of what the difference between analog and digital is, analog is a vinyl record, and digital is a CD, to just give you an idea of what the differences are. The point is that it's a compilation of thoughts and viewpoints that I've had from teaching at the university level for over 30 years. And what I have learned about how students have changed. And if we really kind of think about it, we don't really think about a lot of things like this, but we are in such a technologically proficient world now. Pretty much everything that we do is technology based. Look at this, for example. I mean, the majority of communication that anybody is doing with anybody around the world during this really difficult time is a direct result of the power of technology. And for that, we should all be extremely grateful. It keeps us all connected. And that's one of the most valuable things that we can have right now, because the human condition needs that, needs connecting with people. Where that diverges from playing an acoustic instrument, whether it be the horn, whether it be the oboe, whether it be the flute, whether it be, you name it, any acoustic instrument, is that some of the things that I mentioned earlier on in my discussion of developing the Hollywood sound and the patience necessary to go through these steps again and again and again and again and again, knowing what the end game is, knowing what you want it to be, and knowing that these are the steps that are going to get you there. It's more and more difficult. Humans by design are impatient to begin with. Excuse me. And that gets exacerbated with the advancement of technology. You know, people of my generation, in order to get information, had to go to the local library and look up in encyclopedias or dictionaries or read, you know, so I've got it now all in the palm of my hand. Instant access, instant knowledge, instant gratification, all of the things that don't necessarily come with practicing. And it dawned on me that if you think about this for a second, the instrument that we play is probably the largest piece of analog thinking left in our daily life. And with that comes almost a necessity for a shift in focus, a shift in thought process, and a shift in intent. And that's not always that easy to do. We tend to expect perfection because we see it all around us, what our perceived perfection is. I mean, I don't believe that perfection is possible because I cannot define the term. And I find that if I can't define a term, then I can't possibly strive to do it. So I tend to take the word perfect, throw it out, and I use the word better because I can define that. It allows me to be more proactive about what I intend to accomplish that day in my practicing. But it's a whole series of chapters that deal with all kinds of different things about performance anxiety, about red light. One is called red light concentration. It revolves around what I consider to be the 4 R's of success, which is research, repetition, retention, and result. I talk about accountability. I talk about the ability to have ownership of something rather than renting it. How do you know if you really got it? You know, one of my sayings in there is, if you think you got it right, you've got more work to do. And so there's a whole bunch of things in there that I think really apply not only to young horn players, but I think applies to young instrumentalists everywhere. Yes, it's geared, the examples are geared towards the horn players. Um, but I think it's really valuable stuff. You can look at it at my website, which is richardtoddmusic.com. If you have interest in purchasing it, please leave a comment. Or you can email me at my university address, which is r.todd@miami.edu. I'm working on a new platform in order for it to be sold. So right now, it's just stay in touch because it will be available soon. And so that's it. It's just it's a common sense way of looking at how the world around us affects us in a positive and negative way when it comes to becoming more proficient on our instruments.
No, that's great, and it's hugely powerful nowadays because you know, we do, like we talked about earlier today, but we do have a lot more time at home as musicians, and you know, the perfect time for us to get back on the horn and play and get more attuned with our instrument, and this would be a really good digital means to do so. So again, you can find that at Richard's website, richardtodd.com.
richardtoddmusic.com.
richardtoddmusic.com. I'm sorry. We'll post a comment in the comment section to make sure that everyone knows where to go to find that. And yeah, so it's a great amount of content that you've created for the community, whether you're a horn player, flute player, tuba player, whatever. So wonderful. Thank you so much for all of that. I have one last question for you, and it is, although it's a cliche for most of the music industry, I do have a question for you, and that is, what mouthpiece do you play?
Well, I play my own designer line of mouthpieces that I have created with Osmond, with Bob Osmond of Osmond Mouthpieces, Osmond Brass, Osmond Music, however many different ways he has. It is a fantastic mouthpiece that works. I have a number of students in my studio. I am not one of those that push my own equipment down my students' throats and expect them to change their horns and change their mouthpieces. But I wait for them, just like Mr. DeRosa did with me. I wait for them to say, you know what, something's not right. I'm not really liking the way this is. And then I'll have them play, you know, here, try this, try this. I've got about 5 or 6 different ones. They're all basically the same concept. It's either whether or not it's a straight cup on the inside or a bowl-shaped cup on the inside, and whether or not the depth is what it is, or a 1/16 of an inch shallower or a 1/16 of an inch deeper. So, you know, that's all. And I have a number of my students have chosen the RT2, which is the bowl-shaped mouthpiece that I normally play. And they play both crispy styles and Geyer styles. So I do not believe that you need, and they're not big mouthpieces. I think they're by the Giardinelli model, they're about an 8 size. So they're not big, but they're not, you know, tiny either. And the people, the students of mine that have put it on their Geyer style horns, they sound better than they've ever sounded. So, you know, I'm not a believer that, you know, you need a small mouthpiece if you're going to play a Geyer, that you need a big mouthpiece if you're going to play a crispy. It all depends on how you use your air. That's really where the crux of it is. It's not your equipment, it's your air.
That's excellent. That's great. So you've heard it here, actually. So Richard Todd has gone through this entire great content, so much information packed into a little over an hour. But as you've heard his career from when he was 21 in the Utah Symphony to you know, now a full associate professor of horn at the Frost School of Music, and the in-betweens are just incredible. Thank you so much for joining us today, Richard, and your time sharing all of that information and value. Please check out his website and comment in the comment section for any additional questions. I'll try to answer as much as I can, and then I'll forward some of your comments to Richard if you want me to do so, for sure. And thank you for joining us today. Like I said, today has been our webcast series, Q&A series with, this is one of our first with an actual Hans Hoyer artist or artist for Buffet Crampon. But stay tuned, we're gonna continue the series through the end of April. Next week we have, Tuesday is gonna be our double read day with hosts Matt Vance, our woodwind product specialist, as well as Lori Orr, who is our double read sales manager. And they'll be joined by a special guest, Brenda Schumann-Post, and they'll be talking about double reads from all three of our double read brands, Buffet Crampon, Schreiber, as well as Ruta, one of our newest members of the family. And then on Thursday of next week, a week from today, at the same time at 2 p.m., you can find us on the Besson Facebook page talking about brass bands and the movement in the United States and how that's changed the scope here. So again, Tuesday will be at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard or Eastern Daylight Time on the Buffet Crampon Facebook page, and then Thursday at 2 p.m. on the Besson Facebook page. Yes, Richard has one more thing.
I just want to add one more thing to all young prospective high school students that are interested in pursuing their performance area of specialization or whatever in college. And if you have any questions about the Frost School of Music or my studio, please feel free to contact me, or questions to me in any way, shape, or form. Please contact me at my University of Miami Frost School of Music email address, which is r.todd@miami.edu. And I'll be happy to connect with you.
Perfectly said. Yeah, you can reach out to either one of us in the comments. Also, we're going to continue this series through May, and until we can no longer kind of provide some of this stuff with the time that we have. But through May, we haven't really decided on the ideas yet. So if you have any ideas in the comment section, let us know what you'd like to see from us as Buffet Crampon, from any one of our 12 brands. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you on Tuesday next week and any of our future broadcasts or concerts as part of the Together at Home program. Thank you so much, Richard Todd, for joining us today. And thank you so much to the viewers. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Absolutely.